Thank you, Professor. Now, can we have the speakers up to the podium for about maybe just another few minutes before we close things out for DEF CON 2015? Come on up. Spence hopping up behind me, rocking the bow tie. You may step up to the podium and ask your questions. These papers are open for discussion. Yes, sir.
Question for Spence. Thank you very much. That was a really fascinating talk. Very insightful, a little bit depressing, but let's get over that. Now, one of the most interesting slides was your comparison in terms of mortality of the endovascular versus the amputations. And then you presented another slide which was comparing people who were healed versus non-healed. Have you any data to look at those people who had an angioplasty and healed versus those that had angioplasty and didn't heal? I.e., can you say that if you do the angioplasty and you heal it within 3 months, let's just say,
so independent of revascularization, if you could get the ulceration to heal, regardless if it was a vascular patient or a non-vascular patient, persistent leg ulceration and everything that we've ever studied is an independent risk factor for survival, which was completely unexpected. Whether they're revascularized or not was not an independent predictor.
Is it fair to say, as a follow-up to that, therefore, if you revascularize, i.e. you take away that aspect of the insult that's maintaining an ulcer, that actually the patient has something else going on, and that fundamental biological problem is basically saying that this patient is possibly having total body failure, for want of a better word.
Right. No. The failure to heal is an independent predictor, which is, our statisticians gave me all kind of grief because they said that's not really an outcome, but we changed it around and made it an outcome, and indeed it is an independent predictor, more so than anything else we looked, including revascularization.
So Spence, here's the question that I came away with from your lecture. Did you do an analysis, if you can find comparative cohorts, to look at the time to healing, to the extent that they did, time to healing of patients who had endotherapy versus those who had open therapy?
So in everything that we've ever done, understand that none of our data, it's all observational. Andrew's right, it's observational. So we're about a 60-40 endo-open shop. So 60% of our cases are endo versus 40% open, and so they're not controlled. So we've never been able to show that endovascular is inferior or superior to open surgery, anything we do, but we have that intrinsic bias that you're doing endo on people that probably are better, assuming that they're all done by vascular surgeons, that they're better. The assumption is that they're probably more suited endo, and the people that we did open, we are probably more suited for open. So we don't have a head-on-head comparison, George, to answer your question.
You did have one slide that suggested superiority of open versus endo.
Yes,
but the question I have is, because we hear over and over from speakers at this meeting and others that the trouble with endo is it's an endo followed by an endo, and you won't repeat the therapy unless you haven't healed. That's the end point. So it would seem to me that the question of which gets you to healing quicker plays very well into your concept of the burden of an ulcer.
No, I totally agree
translates into mortality.
Totally
I'd like to know that number. Next year you can tell us.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I share your bias. I personally believe that a complete revascularization is better than incomplete revascularization, which I think you can get with open surgery versus endo.
So let me ask this question both first to Grant and then to the man to his right, Professor Bolton. And that, I still can't call you. I could never call you Andrew. It's just not possible. Grant, so you show all these data, and you talk about us getting summoned to the governor's office, as it were, or you'd say governor. So how do we take these data, which, as you show them, they're shocking and they're depressing. I mean, there's some hope there, though, because there may be some actionable things. But they're also in different people's buckets, right? They're in an emergency department bucket. Sometimes also, if you have a state line for Medicaid, you have a line for, say, foot care. But then if you get rid of foot care, that's a top line thing taken off. So it looks like you're actually saving money, when in fact it costs you more money on the back end, but that never shows up in a political speech. I mean, is this just, I came away, and I have come away from discussions I've had in state houses and in with our federal government, depressed. And it's a little bit like a Mr. Smith DPM, goes to Washington, and it's how do you fix that? And then I'm going to move it to Professor Bolton, who's talked to so many health ministers around the world, and what is it? How do you get them attached to this?
Well, this actually brings a thought that Peter Drucker, management guru, father of modern management, said in the early 90s, and that is we cannot manage change. We can only be ahead of it. Mm-hmm. And that the change literature was on its demise beginning in the 70s and 1980s, and that leaders must view themselves as change agents. And that is what true leadership involves. There is undoubtedly, not only in this healthcare system, but across several other healthcare systems, a real misalignment of reimbursement and getting paid for doing the right things. And ultimately, the only way to circumvent that is to look at a broad societal level and to see to what extent false economics is impacting society. The only way that you can do that is to actually show the numbers. And that's why I very emphatically stated, I think we are at an inflection point, and it is the only way that we move from grim to great is to begin working together across countries, across institutions, to actually show these types of data. And I'm not short of shaming bad decision making, whether it's from any reimbursement schedule or not.
Grant, just to follow up on that, applause is welcome. We have seen in this state a large increase in the number of people who signed up for health care, and that is taken as an optimistic sign. However, what hasn't come to the attention of most people who write newspapers is that the percentage of those people who have joined the Medicaid or Medi-Cal ranks in this state far outpaces the expectations that these people will be signing up for more traditional forms of HMO and private care. And I'm wondering if we're going to see in the future two classes of Medi-Cal patients. The traditional Medi-Cal patient, who are the poor, the disadvantaged, and so forth, and those people who have been shoved into Medi-Cal either by their own choice or beyond their own choice. And so if we look at Medi-Cal patients, if in the future we ought to be very careful in parsing them into two different kinds, those who wound up from socioeconomic reasons and those who got shoved there.
Absolutely. I'd actually like to emphasize a very important point. There is not a good economist on the planet that
you can stop right there.
Yeah, I knew he was going to say that.
I'm not done. That's the first half. That would be the half truth. There is not a good economist on the planet that would not agree to the statement that any individual needs a certain sustainable salary to live. No doubt. The problem is how that's essentially attributed and given to these individuals. Without a system that promotes a competitive landscape where we actually reimburse and we pay for better outcomes among the sickest individuals as opposed to cherry picking or creaming off the top in order to succeed, that's a real problem. And that's how you have a system that results in a two-tiered system that creates these types of inequities. And the reality of this is that we've known for 40 years we've known that individuals that are poor, children, and that are elderly need other forms of mechanisms to get them healthy and productive than the rest of society. And to that extent, we need to use the knowledge that we have to create optimal, and I would say cost-effective systems to know who to treat, when to treat it, and how to treat it, period. And that's policy.
I think also to help is to find people in Congress, in the House, who have diabetes or in the family.
Mm.
In the House of Commons, which is the British Parliament, we have an all-party committee of diabetes. It's chaired by an MP who has type 1 diabetes, and one of the prominent members is an MP with type 2 who was a former minister in Blair's government. And these are very powerful individuals. The current president of the International Diabetes Federation, Sir Michael Hurst, he was a Conservative MP under Mrs. Thatcher's government when they were having major cutbacks. His daughter has type 1 diabetes, and he fought passionately for the introduction in the early 1980s of free syringes, plastic syringes, moving from glass to plastic, and succeeded. So you need champions in Parliament. We also have a parliamentary committee in the European Parliament, which takes me to Brussels occasionally, part of the European Diabetes Association. So lobbying Parliament and the Health Commissioners there is another important role.
I believe we do have a Congressional Diabetes Caucus, and clearly we're not doing enough to caucus with the caucus. So that's a cause for caucusing out in the future. I think I was going to call on Spence to bring us home, but we're out of time, and this has just been. I'll just tell you, this meeting. I'm not much for meetings, to be honest with you. I mean, there's a lot of meetings around the world, and you know, meetings come and meetings go, and I'm pretty agnostic, frankly, rather than evangelical about meetings. I think they serve a purpose, but I think this one has always felt different, and I think the reason it feels different is that I think if you feel it, it's a little more missionary and a little less mercenary, really, and that's in no small part. Now, by design, and it's by the people you see to my left, and particularly because of this man, my longtime friend, and a giant and just a serious class act, George Andros. And now, as we're moving to a kind of on a growth trajectory toward this thing where we're marrying DEFCON DLS. DLS was an offshoot of DEFCON that became an East Coast, West Coast thing, not unlike Tupac and Biggie, for those of you. But now, I think things are moving to a new level. But I want that to happen in a way that doesn't hurt the soul, so to speak, of this great symposium and of DLS. And I think that's going to happen. It's going to happen because we all care about it, and I think I speak for Chris and John et al. And so on behalf of my buddy Joe and George, and I'll ask George to come up and say some final words. I just want to thank you guys. It's been one of the real honors of my life to be a part of this meeting. It's just great. Thank you.
Well, before this turns into a love fest, I think we're all family, and we all have a role to play in this. I think that it should be, as David says, much less mercenary, and let's just all room together next year. Welcome to see you in 2 years back here, and see you in Washington next spring. Have a safe trip home.